She pressed both hands into the cracked earth and pushed herself upright for the third time that hour, jaw locked, refusing to fall again. The wagon wasn't moving. The mule was dying. And the baby hadn't stopped kicking since dawn, as if it already understood that no one was coming. No one except him. If this story moved something in you, subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The mule went down at 2:30 in the afternoon. Rosalie Mercer knew it the moment she felt the wagon lurch sideways and heard the animal's knees buckle against the sun-baked trail. She set the brake by instinct, climbed down before the wagon finished settling, and walked around to the front with the slow, deliberate step of a woman who had already spent her morning composure and had nothing left to spend on panic. The mule, old Henry, who had pulled this same wagon from Missouri to Wyoming without complaint, lay on his side in the dirt sides, heaving one foreleg stretched at an angle no leg was meant to hold. Rosalie crouched beside him. She put her hand on his neck. His pulse hammered fast and shallow beneath her palm. "All right," she said quietly. "All right, Henry." I wasn't going to stand again. She had known mules her entire life. She knew what their breathing sounded like when they were finished. She stayed beside him for 2 minutes. No longer. She could not afford longer. Then she straightened, pressed one hand against the small of her back, and looked down the trail in both directions. Nothing moved. The August heat sat over the Wyoming landscape like a wool blanket soaked in fire, and the mountains in the north rose sharp and pale against a sky the color of bleached bone. The nearest town, Garnet Falls, was 11 miles behind her. The relay station she had been heading toward was 9 miles ahead. Rosalie was 24 years old, 7 months along, and standing alone on a trail that hadn't seen another traveler since daybreak. She walked to the back of the wagon and climbed up to take inventory. She did this the way her father had taught her, methodically, without commentary, without the kind of loud grief that made other people feel useful while accomplishing nothing. Jacob Mercer had been a frontier doctor for 30 years, and his single lasting lesson had been this: you cannot treat a problem you have not looked at clearly. She looked at it clearly. 2 water barrels, one nearly empty, one full, but cracked along the base seam, already weeping a slow, dark stain into the wagon bed. She tipped it. Maybe 2 days of water if she was careful. 1 if the heat held. Food. 6 days of dried biscuits and salt pork. A sack of cornmeal that had gotten damp somewhere near the Platte crossing and had begun to smell. She set that aside. Tools. A hand axe. A coil of rope. No replacement harness heavy enough for the axle weight. She had a rifle. She had powder. She had 14 rounds. She climbed back down, walked back to Henry, and did what needed to be done. The shot rolled out across the empty landscape and came back as silence. Rosalie stood still for a moment with the rifle at her side and her eyes on the mountains. Then she turned back to the wagon, set the brake iron, and began to think through her choices. She could walk to Garnet Falls. 11 miles in August heat, 7 months pregnant, carrying what she could manage. She might make it by nightfall. Or she might not. She could wait beside the wagon and hope someone passed. She could unload the wagon, salvage what she could carry, and walk toward the relay station. None of the choices were good. She was working through the least bad arrangement of a very bad situation when she heard hooves on the trail above her. He came down out of the tree line at an easy walk, one hand loose on the reins, the other resting on his thigh, and he did not look like a man who had expected to find anyone on this section of trail. He stopped the horse about 30 feet out and looked at the wagon, then at the mule, then at Rosalie. How was large in the way that mountains are large, not threatening exactly, but simply present in a way that changed the scale of everything around him. Dark hair pulled back, jaw covered in several days of beard, wearing a canvas work shirt with the sleeves rolled past the elbow and trail dust covering everything from his hat brim to his boot heels. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Rosalie looked back at him without flinching. Then he stepped the horse closer, leaned forward slightly to study the mule, and said, "He's dead." "Yes," Rosalie said. "Leg. And his heart. He was old." The man straightened, studied the wagon, studied the terrain, then looked back at her with the flat, assessing gaze of someone calculating a problem rather than judging a person. "Where are you headed?" he said. "North Relay Station." He glanced at the sky. 9 miles. "I'm aware. You got water." "Enough." His eyes moved to the crack in the barrel and then back to her face, and he said nothing, but his expression said clearly that he did not believe her. Rosalie did not offer to argue the point. "I can get the supply crate off and carry what matters," she said. "I'd ask you to take a message to the relay station if you're heading that direction, but I won't ask you to." "Get in the wagon," he said. She stopped. "I beg your pardon. Not asking you to carry anything. Get in the wagon. I'll take the front, tie my horse to the back, and push it from here to the station." Rosalie looked at him steadily. "That wagon weighs 700 pounds empty." "I'm not going to push it with my hands," he said, and there was something in his voice that might have been patience being applied by force of will. "I've got rope and my horse. It'll be slow, but it'll move." She studied him. "I don't know you." "No, you don't. I'm not in the habit of climbing into wagons with strangers." "That's sensible," he said. "You still look like you're about to pass out." Rosalie drew herself up slightly. "I am not going to pass out." He didn't argue that either. He just waited. After a moment she said, "What's your name?" "Cole Whitmore." "Where are you coming from?" "Cabin in the Bighorns, about 6 miles northeast." She studied him a moment longer. Something in her chest, the part that had learned to distrust quickly after Thomas died, was telling her to refuse. But another part, the part her father had trained, the part that calculated odds rather than feelings, was looking at the cracked water barrel, the dead mule, and 9 miles of open trail, and arriving at a different answer. "Rosalie Mercer," she said. She climbed up onto the wagon bench. He tied his horse to the rear wheel bracket, found the length of rope behind the wagon seat, worked out the angle from the harness ring to his saddle horn, and told her to keep the brake half released. Then he walked back to the horse, spoke to it quietly, and clicked his tongue. The wagon groaned, shifted, and began to move. Rosalie sat with her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight and her face forward, watching the trail ahead and allowing herself precisely no expression. They had been moving for almost 40 minutes before he spoke again. "Husband meeting you at the station." The question was ordinary, the kind anyone might ask. Rosalie said no. He waited. She decided the situation warranted explanation, if only because it would prevent him from asking the same question 3 different ways. "My husband passed 6 weeks ago. Fever. I buried him outside Garnet Falls, and I've been sorting out the estate since." She kept her voice level. "I'm trying to reach my sister's property north of Casper. She's the only family I have left." Cole said nothing for a while. Then he said, 6 weeks. "Yes." "And you're—" He stopped. 7 months, she said. "I know what you're going to say." "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to say I shouldn't be traveling alone in my condition." He was quiet for a moment. "I was going to say you had a hard 6 weeks." Rosalie blinked once. That was not what she had expected. "Yes," she said. "I did." They continued in silence. The trail climbed toward the first ridge, and the wagon worked harder on the grade. She could hear the horse straining, hear Cole speaking to it in short, firm words that carried through the heat. She turned once to check the rope tension and saw him walking beside the animal's shoulder hand, on the bridle coaxing rather than commanding. He did not look back at her. She faced forward again. It was near the top of the ridge that they heard the riders. Rosalie heard them first, hoots, multiple moving fast from the south, coming up the same trail they had traveled. She turned on the seat. Cole had already stopped. He was standing with his head tilted, listening, one hand lifted to settle the horse. "How many?" she said. 4, maybe 5. He looked at her then, and for just a moment, his eyes dropped to the rifle across her knees, then back to her face. Not suspicious. More like he was confirming something he already suspected. "That rifle loaded," he said. "Yes." "Are those riders going to be a problem?" Rosalie felt the question land somewhere deep in her sternum. She considered lying. She considered several different versions of the truth. She chose the truth because she had been raised to believe that practical people deserved practical honesty. Possibly, she said. There was a dispute over my husband's claim before he died. Some men from the Crail Land Company came to the house twice. Thomas told them the property wasn't for sale. After he died, they came back. Cole looked at her steadily. What happened when they came back? I told them the same thing Thomas did. She paused. The second visit they came after dark. The muscle in his jaw moved. He looked at the rifle again and then at the approaching dust cloud. Stay on the wagon, he said. I'm not going to. I'm not asking you to hide, he said. I'm asking you to stay on the wagon so they can see you're not alone. He took a position beside the front wheel, one hand resting on the wagon side facing south. It was not an aggressive posture, but it was an unmistakably clear one. There were 4 riders. They pulled up about 20 feet out, and the one in front, wide-brimmed hat jacket, too heavy for August. The kind of deliberate presentation that men wear when they want to remind you. They have money. Looked at the wagon, looked at Cole, and looked at Rosalie. Mrs. Mercer, he said. His voice was pleasant. Mr. Dales, she said. Didn't expect to find you out here. We came by your camp this morning, your husband's camp, I mean, and found you'd packed up and gone. I'm heading north. We have some business to settle before you do that. We have no business, Rosalie said. Thomas's answer was no. I see no reason to revisit it. The man Dales smiled with the upper portion of his face and nothing else. He glanced at Cole with the brief, dismissive appraisal of a man who considers himself the most important person present. This a hired hand, he said. Cole said, this is a woman traveling to her family. You'll let her pass. The pleasant expression on Dales's face went somewhere else entirely. He looked Cole over with the slow, deliberate attention of a man deciding whether to bother, and then said, You don't know what arrangement we have with her late husband. I know what she's told me, Cole said. And I know that 4 men chasing down a widow on a mountain trail don't have the kind of arrangements that hold up in daylight. Dales's jaw tightened. He looked back at Rosalie. The Crail Company has a signed document, he said. Your husband's signature, option to purchase. Rosalie looked at him steadily. My husband's signature, she said, was witnessed by your company's own attorney on a document your company produced the day before Thomas's fever broke 204 degrees. He was not competent to sign anything. I have the doctor's letter saying exactly that. The silence that followed was heavy and specific. Prove it in front of a judge, Dales said. I intend to, Rosalie said. Dales looked at Cole again. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with words, the male arithmetic of who would win a direct confrontation calculated in fractions of a second. Cole had 4 inches on the largest of the riders and stood with the particular stillness of a man who had nothing to prove. You'd do yourself a favor, Dales said to Cole, staying out of Crail business. Cole said nothing. After a moment, Dales turned his horse. They rode back south. All 4 of them. Rosalie watched until the dust settled and said nothing. Cole walked back to the horse, checked the rope, and said, Is that document legitimate? No, Rosalie said. But I can prove it isn't. That's why you're heading north. There's a territorial judge sitting in Casper starting the 1st of September. I have 8 days. Cole looked up at her. And what's in that supply crate? Rosalie looked down at him without blinking. Evidence. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded once and walked back to the horse's shoulder. Let's move, he said. They reached the relay station at dusk. The station master, a heavy-set man named Gruber, who smelled of pipe tobacco and harness oil, looked at the wagon, looked at Cole, looked at Rosalie's condition, and made the exact face that Rosalie had been seeing on strangers' faces for 6 weeks. You travel alone out here, Gruber said. I had a mule, Rosalie said pleasantly. Until I didn't. Cole handed the horse's reins to the stable boy without being asked, pulled the supply crate from the wagon bed by himself, and set it on the station porch. He spoke to Gruber briefly, too quietly for Rosalie to hear, and Gruber's expression shifted into something more useful. Rosalie was given the station's single private room, a small space with a cot, a washstand, and a window facing north. She set the supply crate under the cot, washed her hands and face, and ate the meal Gruber's wife brought without tasting it. When she went back to the porch, Cole was sitting on the steps cleaning the mud from his boots hat on his knee. She sat on the bench beside the door. "Thank you," she said. He looked up briefly. "You'd have managed. Not as well, and not as fast." He returned his attention to his boot. "Where's your sister's property exactly?" "North of Casper, about 2 miles off the main road. There's a creek. Through the Bighorns. Around the southern pass." He was quiet. Then he said, "That route is being watched." Rosalie looked at him. "Watched by who?" "Crail runs freight wagons through the southern pass. They've got men stationed at the mouth who check every vehicle. Started about 3 weeks ago. Word is they're looking for someone carrying documents they don't want reaching the territorial seat." The words sat in the night air between them. Rosalie said quietly, "How do you know this?" "Because they came to my cabin," Cole said. "About a month ago. Man named Hargrove, company badge, very polite. Told me the Crail Company was interested in purchasing my water rights. I told him no. He told me I'd want to reconsider." He set down the boot. "Since then they've had men on the trail below my place. Not quite close enough to be trespassing. Close enough to make a point." Rosalie was very still. "They want your water rights because the northern creek on my land is the only reliable water source in this section of the Bighorns. Everything that moves through the mountains in summer needs it." He looked at her. "Every freight route, every cattle outfit, every settlement wagon." "If they control the water," Rosalie said slowly, "they control who moves and who doesn't," he finished. She looked out at the dark mountains to the north. "The documents in my crate show that the Crail Company has been bribing county officials to delay competing freight licenses. They've been forcing independent operators out of business and then acquiring the routes at foreclosure prices." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "And your husband's claim," he said. "Thomas's property sits at the junction of 2 freight lines that Crail wants to consolidate. His land is worth 4 times what they offered. They tried to steal it while he was dying, and they'll have a signed document that says they didn't." Cole stood, picked up his hat, and settled it on his head. "I'm heading back to my cabin in the morning," he said. Rosalie nodded. She had known this was coming. "But the northern route," he said carefully, as if working something out as he spoke, "goes through my land, not through the pass. There's a ridge trail that comes out 2 miles from the Casper Road on the other side of the Crail checkpoint." She looked up at him. "Nobody uses it," he said. "It's steep, and it takes 4 days instead of 2. Your wagon can't do it. My wagon is going nowhere without a mule. You'd have to go on horseback. Pack only what you can carry." "I can carry quite a lot," Rosalie said. Something moved in his expression that wasn't quite a smile. "I reckon you probably can," he said. She watched him. "You said you were heading back to your cabin," she said. "I am." "That's the same direction." "It is." She understood what he was offering without either of them having to name it. "The supply crate weighs 22 pounds, she said. "I can make a pack frame from the harness wood." "I can carry the crate," he said. "We'll share it," Rosalie said. He looked at her directly. "You don't have to negotiate everything." "I'm not negotiating," she said. "I'm establishing a partnership. There's a difference." He held her gaze for 2 full seconds. Then he said, "First light." "First light," Rosalie agreed. She didn't sleep well. The cot was perfectly adequate, and the room was quiet, and she was exhausted in the deep gravity-heavy way of someone who had been traveling for too many days on insufficient food and too much fear. None of that mattered. She lay on her side with her hand on her stomach and listened to the baby move and thought about Thomas. She had been doing this every night for 6 weeks. Not mourning exactly, or not only mourning. Thinking through the particular arithmetic of grief, which was nothing like the arithmetic in ledgers, and nothing like the arithmetic her father had taught her for diagnosing illness, but which followed its own logic, if you sat still enough to let it reveal itself. Thomas had been a good man. Quiet, steady, with a habit of sitting on the porch after supper and watching the light go out of the sky without saying anything about it. He'd had no talent for pretty words and no need for them, and she had loved that about him, in the particular way a person loves something they didn't know they needed until it was the thing they had. He'd known he was dying before the fever broke 200 degrees. He'd known, and he'd told her 3 things. Bury me properly, get the papers to the judge, and don't let them make you small. She hadn't buried him particularly well. The ground was hard, and she'd been alone, and it had taken all of one afternoon and part of an evening. She'd put the marker in straight, though. She'd seen to that. She was working on the second thing. The third thing she was working on every day, in the small moments when Dale smiled his half-smile and Gruber made his face at her, and strangers on the road looked at her belly before they looked at her eyes. She pressed her palm flat against the baby's kick and thought, 8 days. 8 days, and the judge would be in Casper, and she had the papers, and Thomas's name would mean something again. She could survive 8 days. She could survive a lot of things. Cole was already awake when she came out. At first light had the horse saddled and her supply crate roped into a pack arrangement on the animal's flank. He handed her a cup of coffee without comment. She drank it standing up facing north. He did not ask whether she was sure about this. She appreciated that. Gruber came out to see them off and stood on the porch with his thumbs in his suspenders, looking between them with an expression that clearly communicated his opinion of 2 people heading into the Bighorns in August. One of them a mountain man with no particular social graces, and the other a heavily pregnant widow who hadn't slept enough to fool anyone. "That trail is steep," Gruber said. "Yes," said Cole. "There are bears." "There usually are," said Cole. Gruber looked at Rosalie. "Ma'am, I don't think you ought to—" "Mr. Gruber," Rosalie said, setting down her cup. "I appreciate your concern, truly. But I've come 200 miles and buried my husband and faced down 4 company men on a mountain trail, and I intend to reach Casper with the evidence I'm carrying, or I intend to die trying, and either way, I need to be moving rather than standing here discussing it." Gruber closed his mouth. Cole set down his own cup, moved to the horse, and looked at her. "Ready," he said. "Ready," she said. They headed north into the Bighorns as the sun came over the eastern ridge, the heat already building behind it, like something preparing itself, and the mountains ahead, looking the same way. They always looked enormous, indifferent, and entirely unimpressed with the scale of human difficulty. But Rosalie Mercer had never needed the landscape to be impressed. She needed it to hold still long enough for her to cross it. And somewhere ahead beyond the ridge trail and the Crail checkpoints and the 8 remaining days, a judge was sitting in Casper waiting to hear the truth. She intended to deliver it. Cole rode slightly ahead, reading the trail, and said nothing more than was necessary, and she found against every expectation that this was the most comfortable she had felt in 6 weeks. Not safe. She wasn't naive enough to call it safe, but accompanied. And for now, that was exactly enough. The ridge trail was nothing like the main road. Cole had warned her it would be steep. That word she was learning covered a great deal of territory in a mountain man's vocabulary. Steep apparently meant sections where the horse had to be led because riding would shift the weight wrong on the switchbacks. It meant places where the trail narrowed to a shelf of packed earth barely wider than her shoulders, with a drop to the left that she refused to calculate, and a rock face to the right that she used as a handrail. It meant that by the second hour, her boots were making sounds they hadn't made before, and the backs of her calves ached with the specific cruelty of muscles doing work they hadn't agreed to. She didn't complain. Cole set a pace that was fast, but not careless, and she matched it without being asked to. He glanced back at her every 10 minutes. Not in the hovering, hand-wringing way of a man who expected her to fail, but in the precise, economical way of someone tracking a potential problem in his perimeter. She found she didn't mind it. It was the same way she checked the water barrel. Not sentiment. Function. They stopped once at a spring to refill the canteen. She sat on a flat rock and pressed her hand against her ribs, waiting for the stitch in her side to release, and watched Cole crouch at the water's edge and drink from his palm without ceremony. "How far today?" she said. If the upper trail holds, we can reach the trapper's shelter by tonight. It's rough, but it's covered, and the trail riders don't know it exists. And tomorrow we see. He looked at the sky. Storm weather coming in off the northwest. Could hit tonight, could hit the day after. Can't say yet. Rosalie looked at the sky too. There was something building behind the farthest peaks, a density to the air that hadn't been there at first light. I can read weather reasonably well, she said. My father spent 3 years in the mountains. He taught me the signs. Cole looked at her with that flat, assessing gaze. What do you see? She studied the clouds. Day after tomorrow, maybe the evening. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, recapped the canteen, and handed it to her. That's what I see too. It was a small thing, but she noticed the way he didn't look surprised by it. They kept moving. By midday, the heat had settled into the serious range, the kind that didn't ask permission and didn't accept argument. The kind Rosalie had learned to move through rather than against. She drank water at regular intervals, kept her breathing steady, and focused on the next 10 feet of trail rather than the miles remaining. Cole had given her his hat an hour earlier. He'd done it without preamble. Simply stopped, taken it off his head, held it out and said, "You need this more than I do." She'd started to refuse on principle. "The sun's coming from the west, and your bonnet doesn't cover the left side of your face," he said without inflection, as if he were reporting the temperature of the spring water. She took the hat. The brim was sweat-stained and smelled of horses and pine resin, and several months of outdoor living. She settled it on her head, and it sat too large, and she didn't care one bit. "Thank you," she said. He said, and started walking again. That was when she noticed the scar on his forearm, a long, ropey line from elbow to wrist on the inside of his left arm, old and well-healed, but significant. She didn't ask about it. People who spent their lives in the mountains collected marks. She had a scar herself along her left palm from a harness buckle the year she was 16, and she didn't tell that story to people she'd known less than a day. But she noticed it. She was making a catalog without intending to the way she'd always cataloged things. Patient records ledger. Entries the face of a man who smiled too long. Data points. The scar. The way he spoke to the horse differently than he spoke to people, softer, more specific, more patient. The pack arrangement on the horse's flank that was balanced with obvious experience. The way he'd handed her the hat without making it a kindness she needed to feel grateful for. Thomas had been like that. He'd shown love through logistics. She stopped that thought before it went somewhere she couldn't afford to go today. 8 days. Stay focused on the 8 days. They were 2/3 of the way up the second switchback when Cole stopped so suddenly that she walked directly into his back. He was already still hand-lifted, head angled to the left. Rosalie heard it a moment after, voices maybe a quarter mile below them, carrying up through the dry air with terrible clarity. 2 men unhurried moving north on the lower trail. The lower trail that should have been empty. "Krail," she said quietly. "Can't tell yet." He listened for another 30 seconds. Then, "Move up. There's a break in the rock face another 50 yards. We can hold there." They moved fast and quiet. Cole took her arm at the worst section of the trail, not pulling her, just steadying her on a loose patch of shale, and released it the moment she had her footing. The horse followed with the practiced calm of an animal that had spent years in the mountains and knew how to be quiet when its rider needed quiet. They reached the rock break. It was a natural notch in the cliff face wide enough for 3 people to stand without being seen from below. Rosalie pressed her back against the stone and waited. Cole stood at the edge of the notch and listened. The voices grew closer. 2 men below on horseback moving steadily north. She caught fragments, a name she didn't recognize, a complaint about the heat, a reference to a woman, and a package, and a finder's bonus. Her jaw tightened. Cole looked at her. She shook her head slightly. "I'm fine. Keep listening." And he turned back. The riders passed below them and continued north. Their voices faded. Cole waited another 2 full minutes before he stepped out of the notch. "They're ranging wide," he said. "That's not a patrol route. They're searching. Which means they know I'm not on the main road." Or they suspect it. He looked up the trail. We need to make the shelter before dark. Pick up the pace. She didn't ask if she could manage it. She simply started walking faster. He kept pace beside her now rather than ahead, and she noticed that too, the small recalibration, the way he'd adjusted without discussing it. The trapper's shelter was everything Cole had promised, and nothing more. 4 walls, a roof that had survived several winters, with the wounded dignity of something that kept working past its original design life, and a raised wooden platform that served as a sleeping surface, and was, she would admit, preferable to the ground. There was a fire pit. Stone-lined, old, with the ash of someone else's fire still in it from what might have been a year ago, or might have been last season. Cole got a small fire, going small enough not to be visible from the lower trails, and heated water from the spring they'd passed on the way up. Rosalie unpacked the supply crate methodically. She separated what she needed tonight from what needed to stay protected. The documents were wrapped in oilskin inside a false bottom she'd built into the crate herself, using a method her father had taught her for transporting medicines that couldn't get wet. Cole watched her hands work and said nothing. She made a simple meal from what she'd packed: biscuits, dried meat, the last of a small round of hard cheese that was approaching the philosophical limit of its edible life. She divided it evenly without asking and handed him his share. He looked at the portion. You should eat more. I'm eating the same as you. You're eating for... He stopped. For 2, she finished. Yes, I'm aware. She met his eyes. I know my own needs, Mr. Whitmore. I've been managing them for 7 months without assistance. A pause. Fair enough, he said. She ate. He ate. The fire was small, and the shelter was warm from the retained heat of the day, and outside the first breath of wind moved through the pines in a way that suggested the storm was reconsidering its timeline. Tell me about the Crail Company, Cole said. She looked at him. What specifically? Everything in that crate. Start at the beginning. She studied him for a moment. Then she put down the rest of her biscuit and began. She told him about the freight operation, how it had started legitimately enough, hauling goods between railroad depots and mountain settlements. How it had grown, acquiring smaller competitors and the routes they'd been licensed to run. How the corruption had started small, a delayed shipment here, an inflated invoice there, and then grown into something systematic and deliberate and cruel. She told him about the winter of the previous year, when medicine intended for 3 mountain communities had been rerouted and held in a Crail warehouse in Laramie. The official report had called it a transport breakdown. The actual ledger showed it had been held deliberately until the communities bid for it at 3 times the original price. She told him that her husband had found out because Thomas had been one of the independent freight operators Crail was squeezing out. He'd started comparing delivery records with neighbors and found the pattern. He'd gone to the county clerk and found the falsified licensing documents. He'd started copying things quietly, carefully over the course of 4 months before anyone noticed. Before he got sick. Cole was very still. The fever, he said. Was it? No, she said. The fever was the fever. Thomas was not a man who would have manufactured his own illness for effect. She heard the sharpness in her voice and modulated it. But Crail's men had been pressuring him for 2 months by then. The stress didn't help. Cole looked at the fire for a long moment. Then he said, I hauled freight through these mountains for 6 years before I built the cabin. Before that, I guided settler wagons on the eastern routes. He paused. 3 years ago, I turned down a contract from a man named Hargrove, company called Western Consolidated. He wanted exclusive use of my northern trail for the summer season. Rosalie went still. Western Consolidated is a subsidiary of Crail. I know that now. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it. I didn't know it then. I just didn't like the terms. Exclusive use meant I couldn't let independent operators cross my land. He looked at his hands. I said no. They've been trying to isolate your water source ever since. Seems that way. He was quiet for a moment. How many people died last winter? She didn't look away from him. The medicine shortage directly, the doctor's records show 11 confirmed, probably more that weren't recorded. Cole's jaw worked once. 11, he said. Yes. The fire snapped. Outside, the wind picked up another degree. He said, "I want to look at those documents." She considered him, the set of his shoulders, the quality of his stillness, the way he'd asked rather than demanded. Then she reached into the crate and began carefully unfolding the oilskin. She handed him the ledger copy first. He held it closer to the fire and read with the concentrated focus of a man who was accustomed to reading maps and terrain reports and who understood that numbers told stories if you looked at them correctly. He turned 3 pages. Then he stopped. "There's a name here," he said. "Bellard. Jeb Bellard." She leaned to look. "He's one of the route supervisors. He signs off on the rerouted shipments." "Jeb Bellard drives the supply wagon for Garnet Falls every other Thursday," Cole said. "He's been doing it for 2 years. Everyone in this section of the territory knows his face." The information landed in Rosalie's chest like something cold. "He's been delivering to Garnet Falls with one hand," she said slowly, "and signing reroute orders with the other. Which means he'd have known about your husband. Which means—" She stopped. "Which means he probably told them about you." She sat back. The timeline rearranged itself inside her mind with the terrible efficiency of facts that had been waiting for their proper order. Bellard drove the Garnet Falls route. Thomas had spoken to people in Garnet Falls. Bellard would have heard the questions pass them back up the chain, and Hargrove's men had known what Thomas was doing before Thomas had known they were watching. "The fever," she said quietly. "Don't," Cole said. She looked at him sharply. "Don't go down that road tonight," he said. "You can't afford it. Not with 8 days left and 2 trail riders ranging this section of the mountains." His voice wasn't cold. It was the voice of a man who understood the particular danger of grief that arrived at the wrong moment. "Save it for after." She wanted to argue. She wanted to say that grief didn't accept scheduling. But he wasn't wrong. And the part of her that ran on her father's training rather than her own heart knew he wasn't wrong. "All right," she said. She folded the documents back into the oilskin and placed them in the crate. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then Cole said, "Get some sleep. I'll take the first watch." "You don't need to watch all night on my account. I watch every night. It's habit." He moved toward the shelter entrance and paused. "The platform's level. The east side is better if your back is bothering you." She looked at him. "How did you know my back is bothering me?" "You've been shifting your weight to the right since the second switchback." She had nothing to say to that. She lay down on the platform on the east side, which was as promised level and slightly warmer from the stone. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind and the small sounds of Cole settling at the shelter entrance and the horse shifting its weight in the lean-to outside. She was asleep faster than she'd expected to be. She woke to Cole's hand on her shoulder, firm, brief, immediate. "We need to move," he said. Outside the shelter. It was still dark, but it was the dark of very early morning rather than the dark of midnight. She sat up and her body made its full inventory of complaints in rapid sequence: back calves, the ache along her left side where she'd slept on a board seam. "Storm," she said. "Riders, lower trail. They made camp last night about half a mile south. I could see their fire from the ridge." She was already reaching for her boots. "How many?" "At least 4, could be 6. They'll be moving at first light." He'd already packed her crate. Her jacket was laid ready beside it. "Can you move fast?" "How fast?" she said. "Fast." "Then yes," she said. They left the shelter 15 minutes before the sky began to gray, moving north on the upper trail with the horse loaded, and Rosalie setting a pace that surprised him. She knew it surprised him because he glanced back at her twice in the first half mile, with the slightly recalculated expression of a man revising an estimate. She didn't say anything about it. She just kept moving. The morning burned off fast, and the heat returned with the particular aggression of a second-day August sun. By mid-morning, they were on a section of trail that Cole called the Long Traverse, a series of exposed ridgelines where the footing was good, but there was no cover, and anyone on the peaks above could see them clearly. "How long?" Rosalie said. 2 hours if we move steady." Then we move steady. They moved steady. Halfway across the second ridgeline, Cole stopped abruptly. She stopped beside him. On the slope above them, high maybe 1,000 feet up, moving along the crest, was a single rider. He was not moving the way a man moves when he's traveling. He was moving the way a man moves when he's looking for something. Cole didn't speak. He simply put one hand on the horse's neck, stilling it, and stood perfectly motionless. The rider above them paused. Rosalie's hand found her rifle strap. Cole's hand closed over hers on the strap, not stopping her, not controlling her, just steadying. Steady, the gesture said. Not yet. The rider above sat for one very long minute scanning the slope below him. Then he turned his horse and moved east along the crest and disappeared behind the ridgeline. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Cole released her hand. They're triangulating, he said quietly. Two groups. The ones on the lower trail coming north, the one on the ridge pushing west. They're trying to push anyone in this section toward the eastern face. Which is where Crail's checkpoint is. Yes. She thought for a moment. What's on the western face? He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite reluctance, but its neighbor. The northern creek, he said. She understood immediately. Your cabin. My cabin. My land, and the only route through this section that isn't covered. You told me you hadn't let anyone cross your land in 3 years. I didn't say that, he said. I said I hadn't guided anyone in 3 years. A pause. This is different. She looked at him carefully. Is it? He held her gaze. It is, he said. And there was something in the way he said it that was not about the trail, or the route, or the Crail Company riders at all. She didn't push it. She simply said, how long to your cabin? If we cut west now, we can be there by late afternoon. Then let's cut west. The western approach to his land came through a stand of old-growth pine that opened suddenly onto a wide creek flat. She heard the water before she saw it, that particular sound of mountain creek water moving fast over rocks, the sound that meant cold and clean and real. Cole's cabin sat back from the creek on a low rise. It was not what she had expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. It was larger than a shelter and smaller than a farmhouse. Hand-built from the trees on this land, she could tell with the particular character of something that had been added to over years, rather than designed all at once. A covered porch. A lean-to stable that was better built than some houses she'd been in. A kitchen garden on the south side that was producing enthusiastically, despite or perhaps because of its owner's obvious indifference to aesthetics. Cole took the horse to the stable without ceremony. Rosalie walked to the porch and stood for a moment looking at the creek and the mountains beyond it, and the particular quality of light that this elevation produced in mid-afternoon, which was nothing like the flat hot light of the lower trails. Up here it had angles to it. Dimension. She heard him come out of the stable. There's food in the root cellar, he said. Help yourself to whatever you need. She turned to face him. Cole, he stopped. Before we go any further, she said, I want to say something directly. He waited. You've shared your trail, your route, your hat, your watch shift, and now your land with me. You haven't asked me for anything in return, and I don't know your full reasons, and I won't pretend to. She met his eyes steadily. But whatever this is, this arrangement between us, I want it to be honest. I won't let you protect me from things I could know, and I won't have you keeping information from me to make things easier. He was quiet for a moment. Like what? He said. Like whatever it is you haven't told me about this cabin and Crail. His expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible unless you were watching for it. Hargrove came back, he said. 2 weeks ago, not just to talk about water rights. He paused. He told me that there was a woman carrying documents that were dangerous to a lot of important people, and that the company would appreciate knowing if anyone unusual came through the northern section. The air between them went very still. He offered you money, she said. Yes. What did you say? I said I hadn't seen anyone, and I didn't expect to. He held her gaze. That was 2 weeks ago. I didn't know your name or your face. I just knew I wasn't going to be Crail's eyes in my own mountains. She looked at him for a long time. And now, she said. Now I know your name, he said. And I know what's in that crate. and I know that 11 people died last winter because of the men who offered me money." He said it without performance, just the plain weight of it. Rosalie let out a slow breath. "All right," she said. "All right." She turned toward the door of the cabin. "I'll start on supper. You look like you haven't eaten a cooked meal since sometime in the last administration." She heard something behind her that might have been the first sound of a laugh quickly reassembled into silence. The cabin's interior told her things about him in the same way all interiors told her things. One chair by the fire, one cup, the shelves organized with military precision along one wall, tools, medicines, books, all in the order of a man who knew exactly where everything was because he never had to navigate around anyone else's arrangement. But there were 2 books on the small table by the window that had not been stacked with the others. They'd been left out. One was a survey map of the Bighorn Range, heavily annotated in pencil. The other was a volume of poetry that was worn enough to have been read many times. She didn't touch the poetry. She found a cast iron pan, located dried beans, and a heel of cured bacon in the root cellar, and began making the kind of meal that required minimal ingredients and significant attention, which suited her perfectly, because significant attention left no room for the thoughts that were trying to crowd back in from the edges. Cole came inside while she was working and moved around her with the easy care of a large man in a small space who'd learned not to knock things over. Not by instinct, she thought, but by practice. He checked the window on the north wall, checked the latch on the door, moved to the shelf and took down a box of rifle cartridges and set them beside her supply crate. "How many do you have?" he said. 14 rounds for the rifle. A revolver Thomas gave me loaded." She paused, stirring. "I know how to use both." "I wasn't asking because I doubted it." She glanced at him. "Then why?" "Because tomorrow we have 2 options. Stay here a day and let the riders south of us move their search pattern east and away. Or move now and risk cutting across their line." He leaned against the wall. "Staying means we eat into your 8 days. How many days do we have left if we stay here tomorrow? We reach Casper on day 7 if nothing slows us. That gives you 1 day of margin. And if something slows us, then we find another way." She considered this. "What do you recommend?" He tilted his head slightly. "I recommended you sleep at the relay station and wait for the southern route to clear. You were right that it wouldn't. So you're telling me your recommendation is no longer reliable? I'm telling you my knowledge of this terrain is reliable. My ability to predict what you'll decide is less so." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Is that a complaint?" "No," he said. "It's an observation." She turned back to the pan. "We stay tonight," she said. "We leave at first light tomorrow. That keeps 6 days plus margin." "Agreed." "And Cole." She paused. "Whatever Hargrove offered you, it was enough to matter to a man living alone in the mountains." He said nothing. "I want you to know I understand that," she said carefully. "What you turned down wasn't nothing." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "My brother died in these mountains 8 years ago. A flood on a crossing I told him was safe." His voice was perfectly level. "After that I came back up here, and I've been deciding ever since that other people's problems aren't my responsibility." She stopped stirring. "But you stopped for me," she said. "You were pointing an empty rifle at 4 men and telling them to leave." "How did you know it was empty?" "Because if it hadn't been empty," he said, "you'd have already used it." She turned around and looked at him fully. He looked back at her with the particular directness of a man who had spent years in his own company and had no remaining practice in avoiding what he actually meant. "I stopped," he said, "because you weren't asking to be rescued. You were just refusing to fall down." He looked at the fire. "I can respect that without it costing me anything." "It cost you something," she thought. "It already has. You just haven't finished the accounting yet." But she didn't say it. She turned back to the pan and let the meal finish cooking, and outside the wind moved through the pines with the particular sound it makes when a storm is still 2 days out but has already decided to arrive. They ate at the table by the window. 1 cup each. 2 plates that he'd had to locate from a shelf she wouldn't have known to look at. She noted, already acquired a second cup. She didn't say anything about that either, but she noticed, and she thought Thomas would have noticed too, and would have said nothing, and would have understood exactly what it meant. She woke before dawn to the sound of Cole's boots on the porch. Not the careful, deliberate sound of a man trying not to wake someone. The fast, purposeful sound of a man who had already made a decision and was acting on it. Rosalie sat up, one hand braced against the platform edge, and listened. The horse was moving in the lean-to. The wind had picked up overnight. She could feel it pressing against the cabin walls, the particular pressure of air that carried weather in it. She pulled on her boots and went to the door. Cole was at the stable entrance, already fitting the horse's bridle in the dark. He heard her and spoke without turning. They moved faster than I expected. The riders. 3 of them crossed onto my land an hour ago. They're on the lower creek trail now, heading north. He checked the cinch strap with 2 hard pulls. If they reach the cabin before we're gone, we're pinned. She went back inside, had the supply crate packed and her jacket on in 4 minutes. When she came out, he looked at the crate, looked at her, and took it from her hands without comment. He tied it to the pack frame in the dark, with the speed of someone who'd done it 50 times, which he probably had. "There's a high route," he said. "It bypasses the creek trail entirely. Goes up the north face of the ridge." "How bad?" "Bad," he said. "But it comes out on the far side of Crail's search pattern. If we can reach the upper saddle before full light, we're past them." "How far to the upper saddle?" 3 hours at a hard pace. She calculated. 3 hours of hard climbing in the dark on a mountain trail, 7 months pregnant with 3 armed men on the trail below them. "Then we'd better start now," she said. He looked at her for one moment in the dark, not assessing, not doubting, but something more like the look a person gives when they are deciding to trust a thing they can't fully explain. Then he turned and led the horse north. She followed. The north face was harder than anything they'd crossed so far. Cole had not exaggerated when he called it bad, which she appreciated, because he was not the kind of man who exaggerated. The trail climbed at an angle that made her thighs burn from the first switchback, and the footing in the pre-dawn dark required everything she had in terms of attention. One misstep, and there was no gentle correction available. She kept her right hand on the rock face wherever it was within reach, and kept her eyes on the ground immediately ahead. Cole led the horse and did not watch her every step, which was the right call. She didn't need to be watched. She needed to be trusted to manage herself, and she did. But every time the trail switched back and she came alongside him, he adjusted his position without comment between her and the drop always. She noticed and said nothing. By the time the sky began to gray behind the eastern peaks, they had cleared the second major switchback and were on a section of trail that leveled briefly before the final push to the upper saddle. Cole stopped and let the horse rest for 3 minutes. Not for her benefit, she knew, but for the horse's, though the timing was convenient. She pressed her hand against her side and breathed steadily. "You're doing this on purpose," she said. He looked at her. "Doing what?" "Stopping when the horse needs it." She met his eyes. "Every time I need a minute, the horse conveniently also needs one." He was quiet for a moment. "The horse has been climbing since before dawn," he said. "So have I." "Yes," he said. "You have." She held his gaze. Something in the gray morning light made his face easier to read, or maybe she was simply better at reading it now. "Don't manage me," she said, not harshly. "I'm grateful for the stops, but don't pretend they're for the horse." He looked at her for a long beat. "All right," he said. "They're for both of you." "That's all I'm asking," she said. He nodded once, and they started moving again. They reached the upper saddle as the sun cleared the eastern peaks and hit the ridge at full strength. From up here, the territory spread out in 3 directions: south toward the main road and the relay station, east toward the mountain's interior, and north toward the Casper corridor. Rosalie could see the lower creek trail from this elevation, a thin brown line threading through the trees, and on it 3 moving shapes. Crail riders, still heading north. Below them, and already past the cabin. "They'll find the cabin empty," she said. "Yes. That tells them we moved in the night. It also tells them I chose a side." His voice was even, but something behind it was not. Hargrove will know I was there. She turned to look at him. I'm sorry. That's because of me. No, Cole said. It's because of them. He held her gaze just long enough to make the distinction clear. There's a difference between the person who starts the fire and the person who refuses to let someone burn in it. She didn't have an answer for that. She turned back to the view and watched the riders below until they disappeared into the tree line. 6 days, she said. 6 days, he confirmed. And the route from here goes northeast, which puts us above the search pattern. The terrain's open, but the trails are good. No more switchbacks. Gentler ones, he said. That's the most comfort you've offered me in 3 days. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Don't get used to it. She almost smiled. They started down the north side of the saddle. It was midday when everything changed. The sound reached her first not hoofbeats, but a human sound, high and frightened, cut off too quickly. Cole heard it the same instant she did and was already off the horse before she'd fully processed it. He held his hand out behind him, stay, and moved forward on foot toward the sound. Rosalie stayed with the horse but unslung her rifle. The safety was off before he was 20 feet ahead. He came back faster than he'd gone. Family, he said. A man, a woman, 2 children. Their wagon's off the trail, 1 wheel down a gully. Man's trapped under the axle. Hurt? Leg. Can't tell how bad. His face was tight. We stop. We lose 2 hours minimum. And there are riders south of us who are going to pick up our track before nightfall. Rosalie was already moving toward the sound. Rosalie, he started. 2 hours, she said, walking. Then we move. He caught up with her in 4 strides. The wagon was in the kind of trouble that announced itself immediately tilted at an angle. No wagon should hold the right rear wheel jammed into a rocky gully, a foot lower than the trail, and underneath the rear axle, a man with brown hair and a pale face, and both hands braced against the wagon frame because the axle was resting across his left thigh. The woman, young, maybe 20, with a child on each hip, made a sound when she saw them that was mostly relief with desperation underneath it. Cole assessed the axle situation in about 4 seconds. Rosalie went to the man. Where's the pain? She said. All of it, the man said through his teeth. The whole leg. Can you feel your foot? Yes. Good. That's good. She put her hands along his thigh carefully. He was trembling, but not from cold. The bone's intact, she said. The weight's compressed, but it hasn't broken through. We need to lift the axle. I know, Cole said from behind her. He was already working with the rope, studying the angle of the wagon, looking at the horse. Rosalie stood and moved to the woman. What's your name? Clara. Clara, I need you to take the children to that flat rock over there and stay there. Can you do that? Clara nodded, jaw tight, and did it. Rosalie went to help Cole. He had the rope rigged from the axle to his horse's saddle horn, running at an angle that would lift the back of the wagon, rather than drag it sideways. He handed her the end of a second rope. When the axle lifts, I need you to pull him clear, he said. Low and sideways. Don't lift him, drag him. Can you do that? Yes. Your footing needs to be solid. There. He pointed to a flat section of ground. Stand there. She took her position. Cole spoke to the horse, settled it, clicked his tongue. The horse leaned into the harness. The wagon groaned a horrible sound of stressed wood and metal, and the axle shifted. It lifted 2 inches, maybe 3. Now, Cole said. Rosalie pulled. The man came clear in one hard drag, and she had him far enough from the axle before the wagon settled back down with a crash that shook the ground. She went down on one knee, with the impact, one hand braced on the dirt, and stayed there for a moment, breathing. Cole was beside her almost immediately, not asking if she was hurt, looking at her face to find out. I'm all right, she said. He nodded and moved to the injured man. The leg was bruised badly, the muscle compressed and already darkening, but Cole probed it with the experience of someone who'd dealt with trail injuries for years and confirmed what Rosalie had suspected. Not broken. Badly hurt but functional in the way that mattered for survival. Rosalie went through her medical supplies with the focused efficiency of her father's training. Willow bark for the pain and inflammation. Clean cloth for the wrapping. Cold water from their canteen pressed against the worst of the bruising. The man's name was Henry. His wife was Clara. Their children were 4 and 6. They were heading for a homestead claim north of Casper that Henry had been granted through the Territorial Land Office. "Stay on the main trail," Rosalie told him while she wrapped his leg. "Not the freight road, the Territorial road. When you get to Casper, go directly to the land office and tell them your name and your claim number. Write it down now and put it in 2 separate places in the wagon." Henry looked at her. "Why?" "Because the Crail Freight Company has been acquiring claims from families who can't prove they're filing paperwork." She held his gaze steadily. "Don't talk to their representatives. Don't sign anything they offer you. Go directly to the Territorial Land Office." Clara had come back from the rock, both children settled at her skirts, and she was listening with the particular attention of a woman who understood that this information was more valuable than the leg wrapping. "You know about Crail," Clara said. "Yes." Rosalie glanced at Cole. He was watching her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, not surprise exactly, but recalibration. The steady recalculation of a man who keeps finding more than he expected. "They came to our last camp," Clara said. "A man in a company jacket, very polite. He told Henry our land grant might have a filing error and that the company could help us clear it up for a small fee." "Don't pay it," Rosalie said. "Don't speak to them again. The man you want is a federal land clerk, not a freight company representative. They are not the same thing no matter what they tell you." Clara looked at her steadily. "Who are you?" "Rosalie Mercer." She tied off the bandage. "I'm a bookkeeper, or I was." She paused. "Right now, I'm the person trying to make sure what happened to your wagon doesn't happen to your land." Clara reached out and put her hand briefly on Rosalie's arm. Said nothing, but her eyes said it. Cole had the wagon back on the trail by the time Rosalie stood. He'd used the horse and the rope and a deadfall branch as a lever, and the process had been loud and physical and effective. "I'll help them get moving," he said to Rosalie. "Then we need to go." She nodded. She had her medical supplies repacked by the time the wagon was rolling. They were back on the trail 40 minutes later. 2 hours had become 40 minutes. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. But after they'd been moving for 15 minutes, Cole said quietly, "You told them about Crail." "Yes. Hargrove's men will find out. Hargrove's men will find out regardless," she said. "But Henry and Clara won't lose their claim because nobody told them what to watch for." She looked at him. "My sister lost her savings to a company that told her a filing fee was standard. My husband spent 4 months building a case because nobody in authority warned him early enough." She kept her eyes forward. "I'm not going to look the other way when I can say something." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father was a doctor." "Yes." "That's not where you got this." She looked at him. "This is yours," he said. "The part that stops when other people won't." She didn't answer right away. The trail moved beneath them, the horse's pace steady and familiar now. Finally she said, "Thomas used to say I was constitutionally incapable of walking past a problem." "Is that a complaint?" "From him, no. He said it like a man who'd married someone slightly more capable than himself and was still figuring out how he felt about that." Cole made the sound that was almost a laugh. She had recognized it. The afternoon brought the first real sign of the storm. The wind shifted west, which Cole registered by stopping mid-trail and lifting his chin and standing very still for 5 seconds. Rosalie stopped when he did. She felt it too, the change in the air, the way it tasted different. "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he confirmed. "Earlier than we thought." "How far to the next shelter?" 3 miles. Old survey station, solid walls." "Then we move faster," she said. He looked at her. "You've been on trail since before dawn." "And the storm doesn't know that," she said. "Move." He moved. They made the 3 miles in good time, Rosalie setting a pace that she would not have said she had in her that morning, but that apparently still existed in some reserve her body had been keeping private. The sky to the northwest turned a color that meant business, and the wind went from directional to insistent. The survey station was small and weathered but solid thick walls, a door that shut and latched a fire pit that had been used recently enough that Cole had a fire going in 8 minutes from the wood stacked inside. Rosalie sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let her body acknowledge privately and without commentary that she was exhausted in a way that had depth to it. The baby had been quiet most of the afternoon, which she had learned to read as the calm that preceded the particular kind of internal activity that happened when she was still long enough for the baby to notice. Cole sat on the opposite side of the fire checking his revolver with the methodical attention of a man who maintained his tools because his life depended on them. "Cole," she said. He looked up. "When Hargrove came to your cabin," she said. "The second time. When he offered you money to watch for me." She kept her voice level. "What exactly did he say about the woman with the documents?" Cole set down the revolver. "He said she was a dismissed employee carrying stolen property, company records, that she was dangerous because she didn't understand what she'd taken or what it would cause. And," his jaw shifted slightly, "and that she was in a delicate condition and liable to make poor decisions because of it." The fire crackled. "He used my pregnancy," she said, "as a reason not to trust my judgment." "Yes. And you still didn't help him. I told him I hadn't seen anyone." Cole picked up the revolver again. "I was also thinking that a woman carrying stolen freight documents through the Bighorns in August sounded like someone who'd made a very deliberate decision and knew exactly what she'd taken." Rosalie looked at him across the fire. "You didn't know me," she said. "No. You just decided that on logic. I decided that a company sending men to chase a pregnant woman through mountains in summer isn't a company protecting stolen property." His voice was flat and certain. "Companies protecting stolen property send lawyers." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You should have been a lawyer." "I'm better with horses." "Debatable," she said. He almost smiled. She was certain of it this time. The storm hit at 10 o'clock with the full force of something that had been building for 2 days and had finally lost patience. The wind hit the survey station walls with a sound like impact rather than weather, and the fire guttered and roared in sequence as the draft changed, and outside the rain came down, not in drops, but in quantities. Rosalie had moved to the wall beside the fire pit for warmth, and Cole had moved to check the door latch when the second gust hit, and something outside a loose board, a piece of the old station's extended structure, came away with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot. She did not flinch. He looked at her. "You all right?" "I grew up in Missouri," she said. "This is Tuesday." He checked the latch, confirmed it was holding, and came back to the fire pit. He sat closer than he had been, not across the fire, but beside it, and therefore beside her, with about 3 feet of space between them. The storm hammered the walls. "Tell me about Elias," she said. The silence that followed was specific in quality, not the silence of a man who didn't want to answer, but the silence of a man deciding how much of the truth he was going to give. "I was 22, Cole said. "Younger than me by 6 years. He wanted to be a guide like I was. He'd done the eastern routes twice, and he was good better than I was at reading people, worse at reading terrain." He looked at the fire. "I was guiding a group of 8 settlers west. Elias came along to learn the mountain section." She waited. "I'd checked the upper creek that morning. It was running normal. I'd crossed that section 40 times, and I knew the behavior of every water source on the route." His voice was steady, but only by discipline. "What I didn't account for was the snowmelt from 2 days prior. It had been warm. I should have reassessed. I didn't." "You made a mistake," she said. "I made a mistake that killed my brother." "You made a mistake that cost your brother his life in a flood," she said carefully. "Elias died because a mountain flooded, not because you didn't love him or didn't try." "I was the guide," he said. "My judgment was the judgment. That's the job." "Yes," she said. "And you've been punishing yourself for it by refusing to use your judgment again for 8 years." She kept her voice even, not challenging, just clear. "Which means the mountains have been one person short of their best guide for 8 years. And I have spent 3 days benefiting from the judgment of a man who insists he can't be trusted with it. Cole looked at her directly. You're not easy to argue with, he said. I'm not trying to win an argument, she said. I'm trying to tell you what I see. And what do you see? She met his gaze across the small space. The fire between them threw light and shadow in equal measure, and the storm outside made the walls feel closer than they were. The world outside feel farther. I see a man, she said, who has been alone in these mountains for 8 years, who guides by instinct and maintains everything in his care with precision and devotion, who turned down money to do something wrong without a second's visible hesitation, and who acquired a second cup before I arrived at his cabin. She held his gaze. That last part is not the behavior of a man who doesn't know how to be responsible for other people. It's the behavior of a man who is already deciding. Cole was very still. The cup was there, he said finally. Gruber's wife sent supplies with me 3 years ago. There were 12 things on that supply shelf, Rosalie said. 1 cup in daily use, and 1 cup that was cleaner than everything else because it had been washed and put away carefully. She did not look away from him. You knew Cole. He said nothing. And in the not saying, he said everything. The fire snapped. The storm pressed at the walls. Outside, the rain came down with the indifference of weather that did not concern itself with human significance. And inside, for the first time in 3 days, in 6 weeks. If she was being fully honest, Rosalie felt something in her chest release its grip slightly. Not joy, not resolution, just the particular quality of being fully seen by another person and finding out it was survivable. She pressed her hand to her side, where the baby had begun to move. Cole looked at her hand. Is something? The baby's fine, she said. Just awake. She paused. Sometimes I think she knows when I've stopped moving long enough to pay attention. He looked at her hand for another moment. I don't know, Rosalie said. I say she. It feels like she. She glanced at him. Thomas thought it was a boy. He had names picked out. What names? She told him. And then, because he'd asked, and because the storm had given them a parenthesis outside the normal rules of what strangers shared, she told him about Thomas, not the grief version, not the ledger version, but the actual version. The man who sat on the porch watching the light fail without needing to comment on it. The man who'd taught himself accounts at 25 because he'd understood that the world ran on numbers and he wanted to understand the world. The man who had been quieter than she was and faster to forgive than she was, and who had looked at her from their first meeting as if she were the most obvious solution to a problem he'd been working on. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He sounds like someone who deserved more time." "Yes," she said. "He did." The storm did not ease, but somewhere in the course of that hour, the quality of the sound changed from violent to insistent to something that was simply weather. Simply the mountains doing what the mountains did and the walls around them holding the way. Walls that had been built, right tended to hold. She fell asleep against the wall without deciding to. When she woke, the fire was still going tended, she understood while she slept. Cole was at the door, which he'd opened a crack, looking at the pre-dawn dark. She sat up. "Storm passed," he said without turning. "Trails wet but passable." She put on her boots. "How many days?" she said. "5, he said. "If nothing slows us." "Nothing will slow us," she said. He turned and looked at her, and whatever was in his expression was not the flat assessment of the first day or the careful recalibration of the second. It was something that had been decided the way decisions look after they've been fully made. "No," he said. "I don't reckon it will." He opened the door and stepped out into the wet morning air, and she followed him, and behind them the survey station held its ground. The way solid things do, without ceremony, without applause, without anything except the plain fact of having held. And ahead of them, 5 days away, a judge was waiting. And the truth was still in the crate. And neither of them was going to stop. The trail out of the mountains was faster than the trail in. Cole set a pace that acknowledged the 5 days remaining without making them the only thing. He read the terrain. The way she'd watched him read it for 3 days now, not cautiously, but precisely choosing lines through wet ground that cost them the least time and the least energy. Rosalie matched him step for step, and didn't pretend otherwise, and somewhere in the first hour of that morning, she understood that they had stopped performing competence for each other and were simply using it. That was its own kind of intimacy. She wasn't sure Thomas would have disagreed. They descended through the northeastern face of the range over the course of 2 days, moving through the kind of country that opened gradually. Tighter trails giving way to wider ones, the tree cover thinning as the elevation dropped the air, losing that particular mountain quality and becoming something broader and flatter and warmer. On the second afternoon, they crossed the territorial road for the first time, and the sight of wagon ruts in actual dirt. Wide recent, the ordinary marks of ordinary commerce felt like returning from somewhere very far away. Cole stopped at the road's edge and looked south, then north. 2 days' ride to Casper, he said. Maybe less if we push. We push, she said. He looked at her sidelong. You've been saying that for 3 days. And we've kept moving for 3 days, she said. The system works. He made the almost laugh sound and turned the horse north. They made camp that night at a creek crossing where 3 other traveler camps had clearly been made before, the kind of place that announced itself as a stopping point through the accumulated evidence of old fire pits and flattened ground. Rosalie cooked. Cole tended the horse and scouted the road south and came back with the specific quality of stillness that she now recognized as the absence of immediate threat rather than the absence of concern. We pick up company tomorrow, he said, settling beside the fire. There's a livestock outfit 2 miles back heading north. 6 riders, a dozen head of cattle. Crail. No, independent. I know the brand Ellison operation out of Douglas. Good people. She considered. Traveling with them gets us to Casper faster. Traveling with them means we're not 2 people on a mountain horse with a supply crate arriving in a territorial seat with Crail riders probably already there ahead of us. He met her eyes. Numbers matter in town. She understood immediately. The journey through the mountains had been about surviving terrain and avoiding riders. What waited in Casper was different. In Casper, the danger wore a badge and a company jacket and a pleasant expression. All right, she said. We travel with Ellison. The livestock outfit absorbed them with the unceremonious practicality of trail people who understood that extra hands and good judgment were worth more than explanations. The foreman, a weathered woman in her 40s named Ruth Ellison, who rode like she'd been born to it and spoke like she'd long since stopped worrying about other people's opinions, looked at Cole, looked at Rosalie, looked at the supply crate and said, You running from something or running to something? Both, Rosalie said. Ruth Ellison nodded, as if that were the most sensible answer available, and told them to ride on the outside of the herd where they could see the road. She told Rosalie her name the second morning without prompting. By the third, she had also told her about the Crail Freight Company's representative who had visited her operation 4 months earlier with a proposal to exclusively handle all Ellison livestock transport. She'd declined. 2 weeks later, 3 of her cattle had been found with their brands altered on the South Road, and a county official had sent a letter suggesting the Ellison brand registration might contain errors requiring review. I've been registered for 11 years. Ruth said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of a woman who had moved past anger into something more useful. Same brand, same county office, same clerk until last year when the new one arrived with a Crail Company letter of introduction. Rosalie looked at her steadily. What's the new clerk's name? Dennison, Ruth said. Arrived in Casper about 14 months ago. Very polite. Very organized. Rosalie reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded sheet. One of the copied pages she kept separate from the main documents for exactly this kind of moment. She unfolded it, ran her finger down a column and stopped. Dennison R., she said. Paid a consulting fee of $40 per quarter by Western Consolidated Freight, a Crail subsidiary, starting 14 months ago. Ruth Ellison's jaw set. That's in your documents, she said. That's in their own ledger, Rosalie said. That they kept because they believed no one would ever see it. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, What do you need in Casper? I need to reach Judge Bellamy before anyone from Crail reaches him first. Bellamy's been in Casper since Monday, Ruth said. He's sitting through the end of the week. You've got 3 days. 3 days. Rosalie had calculated 5. The storm had cost them less time than she'd feared. Then we have room, she said. No, Ruth said, and her voice had changed quality entirely. You don't. Because if Crail has a man in the county clerk's office, they have eyes on the territorial courthouse. They'll know the moment you ride in. She looked north. What you need is to arrive somewhere they're not watching. Cole had been riding close enough to hear. He said, "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Ruth Ellison said, "that a livestock operation arriving in Casper with 6 riders is an ordinary Tuesday, and that an ordinary Tuesday is harder to react to than an alarm bell." Rosalie looked at the woman beside her and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The particular relief of finding an ally who didn't need to be persuaded or protected or explained to, who simply looked at the situation and started solving it. "Tell me what you have in mind," Rosalie said. "Chefeg." Casper announced itself the way territorial seats did not, with grandeur, but with density, the sudden multiplication of buildings and people and commerce that meant a center of something. They rode in with the Ellison cattle in the late afternoon. Cole on the outside left Rosalie in the middle of the outfit with Ruth beside her, the supply crate hidden under a canvas tied to one of the pack mules. Nobody looked at them twice. This was the plan, and it worked with the quiet efficiency of a plan based on understanding how people actually paid attention, which was to the unusual, not the ordinary. A cattle outfit was ordinary. The woman at its center was not extraordinary to anyone who didn't know to look. Ruth split her riders at the main crossroads, sending 4 to the stockyard with the cattle and keeping 2. She led Cole and Rosalie east through the back quarter of town toward a dry goods establishment that turned out to be owned by her sister. The sister, a woman named Pauline, with Ruth's eyes and a more sociable version of Ruth's directness, had a back room and food, and more importantly, current information. "Bellamy's at the courthouse," Pauline said, setting plates on the table without being asked. "Scheduled through Friday. He's got 3 cases ahead of you." She looked at Rosalie. "I heard Dale's came through yesterday." The name landed in the room like a dropped stone. Rosalie set down her fork. "Dale's is here. Arrived with 2 company men and a lawyer," Pauline said. "They met with someone at the county office for 2 hours in the morning. I know because my neighbor's boy sweeps the offices, and he told his mother, and she told me." Cole said Dennison. "That'd be my guess," Ruth said. Rosalie looked at the wall and thought fast. Dale's was here. He'd met with the county clerk who was on Crail's payroll, which meant by now Dennison had almost certainly been asked to confirm whether any freight documents or land claim records had been filed under the name Mercer, or whether any complaint had been submitted to the judge's office on behalf of Thomas Mercer's estate. If they moved tomorrow morning, and Dennison signaled Dale's, they'd have company before they reached the courthouse steps. "I need to file tonight," she said. Ruth looked at her. "The courthouse is closed." "The courthouse is closed," Rosalie agreed. "But judges aren't courthouses." She looked at Cole. "Bellamy is sitting through Friday. He's in Casper tonight. Where does a federal judge stay in a territorial town?" Ruth and Pauline exchanged a look. "Harmon's boarding house," Pauline said. "North End. Mrs. Harmon only takes the better class of traveler." "Then that's where I'm going tonight," Rosalie said. Cole said Rosalie. She looked at him. "You go to a federal judge's boarding house at night with documents you're claiming prove fraud, you'd better have everything in order." His voice was steady and direct. "No gaps, no pages out of sequence, no explanation required." "I know," she said. "I mean everything," he said. "Including how you obtained them, your employment history, every name in those ledgers, cross-referenced against every claim you're making. Bellamy didn't get to federal circuit court by taking people's word for things." She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into the supply crate and began laying documents on Pauline's table. "Then help me put it in order." He pulled his chair around to her side of the table. They worked for 2 hours. Cole read numbers the way he read terrain, looking for what didn't fit, what ran against the expected pattern. What would answer the first question a skeptical man would ask? He found 2 pages out of sequence. He found a date discrepancy in one of the shipping records that Rosalie had missed, and that if left unaddressed would have been the first thing Crail's lawyer attacked. "Here," he said, pointing. "This delivery date is recorded as the 15th, but the payment ledger shows it clearing on the 12th, 3 days before it arrived." She looked at it. Payment was made before delivery. That's a bribe notation, not a shipping record. The freight arrived on the 15th, the bribe was paid on the 12th as a guarantee. "Write that as a note on the page," he said. "In plain language. Don't make Bellamy work for the explanation." She wrote it. When they were finished, the documents were in an order that told a story. A clear one. The kind that didn't require goodwill to follow. "You should come with me," she said to Cole. He shook his head. "Bellamy doesn't need a mountain man's testimony tonight. He needs yours." He met her eyes. "You're the witness. You're the one who worked there, who copied those records, who watched what happened." He paused. "This was always going to end with you in a room with the truth, not me." She knew he was right. She didn't like it, but she knew. Ruth sent one of her riders, a young man named Carver, who knew the north end of town, to walk ahead and confirm that Harmon's boarding house was quiet and that no Crail men were visible on the street. Carver came back in 20 minutes. The street was clear. Rosalie put the documents in the oilskin, put the oilskin in her bag, and stood up. Cole stood when she did. He didn't say be careful. She didn't want him to. "I'll be back in an hour," she said. "I know," he said. Mrs. Harmon was the kind of woman who had spent 40 years managing the threshold between her establishment and the rest of the world, and who communicated her authority over that threshold with the quiet precision of someone who had never needed to raise her voice. She looked at Rosalie on her porch at 8 o'clock in the evening, 7 months pregnant, trail-worn, carrying a bag with an oilskin visible at the top, and said, "We are not receiving visitors." "I'm not a visitor," Rosalie said. "I need 5 minutes with Judge Bellamy. I have federal evidence relating to a fraud case he may hear this week." "The judge is at supper." "Then I'll wait until he's finished." Mrs. Harmon studied her with the comprehensive appraisal of a woman who had seen a great many people attempt a great many things on this porch. "Your name," she said. "Rosalie Mercer. My late husband was Thomas Mercer of Garnet Falls. The Crail Freight Company holds a fraudulent purchase option on his land, and they have a man in your county clerk's office who will make sure that option is validated if I don't speak to Judge Bellamy before tomorrow morning." Mrs. Harmon looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door. "I will ask if he is willing to see you," she said. "You will wait in the hall." Rosalie waited in the hall. It was 11 minutes. She counted them. The man who appeared at the top of the stairs was in his 60s, gray-haired, wearing a wool vest, and the expression of a man who was mildly annoyed and deeply curious in roughly equal measure. He came down the stairs and stopped at the bottom and looked at her with eyes that were precise and careful and did not telegraph either sympathy or skepticism. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. "Judge Bellamy." She opened the bag. "I have ledger copies, shipping manifests, payment records, and correspondence documenting a systematic fraud operation run by the Crail Freight Company against independent operators, homestead claimants, and isolated settlements across 3 counties. I worked as a bookkeeper for the company for 14 months. I have documentary evidence, and I can provide testimony." She held out the organized documents. "I'm sorry for the hour. I believe I'll have company at the courthouse tomorrow that I won't have here tonight." Bellamy looked at the documents she was holding. He did not take them immediately. "How did you come by these?" he said. "I copied them over 4 months while employed at the Crail offices in Garnet Falls. I have dates and documentation of my employment. I have the originals or copies made from the originals, and I can account for every page." "Your husband?" "My husband found the pattern. I built the record." She kept her voice absolutely level. "Thomas died 6 weeks ago. He did not live to see this through. I intend to." Bellamy looked at her for 10 full seconds. Then he reached out and took the documents. He stood in the hall of Mrs. Harmon's boarding house and read for 20 minutes. Not skimming. Reading. Stopping on pages. Going back. Finding the note Cole had suggested she write about the date discrepancy and reading it twice. Then he lowered the documents and said, "There is a name here, Dennison, county clerk." "Yes, sir." "You understand what you're alleging." "I'm not alleging," she said. "I'm showing you a payment record." Bellamy was quiet for a moment. "Come to the courthouse at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Not 9. 8. Come to the side entrance and ask for my clerk, a man named Pruitt. Tell him I sent you." He handed the documents back to her. She looked at him. "You're not keeping them." "I'm keeping this," he said, and held up the page with the date discrepancy note. "The rest are yours until tomorrow morning, when they will be submitted as formal evidence under my supervision." He looked at her steadily. "Which means, Mrs. Mercer, those documents need to be somewhere that Crail's men cannot reach them." She understood. He was protecting chain of evidence. He was also protecting her. "Thank you," she said. 8 o'clock, he said. "Don't be late." She was back at Pauline's in 40 minutes. Cole was at the table when she came in, cleaning the revolver with the focused attention that meant he'd been doing it for longer than the task required. He looked up the moment she entered and read her face before she said anything. "He'll see you," Cole said. It was not a question. 8 o'clock tomorrow, side entrance. She sat down. Her legs were shaking, which she had not allowed herself to notice until now. He read everything. He kept the date discrepancy page. Cole set down the revolver. "You told him about Dennison," he said. "Yes." A beat. "Dales will know by morning if Dennison hears anything about a late-night visitor to Bellamy's boarding house." "I know," she said. "We have until 8 o'clock. Cole looked at Ruth, who had been sitting at the far end of the table. Something passed between them, the silent negotiation of two people who'd lived in practical problem country long enough to run the same calculations simultaneously. "My riders will be at Pauline's door at 7, Ruth said. "All 6. We ride to the courthouse as an outfit." She met Rosalie's eyes. "Anyone who wants to interfere with you is going to have to interfere with all of us." Rosalie looked at her, then at Cole, then back at Ruth. "You don't owe me this," she said. "No," Ruth said. "But Crail has been altering my cattle brands and threatening my land registration for 4 months. So I'm not doing it for you exactly. I'm doing it because I'm tired of eating what they serve and calling it a meal." Rosalie pressed her hand against the table to stop the shaking. Cole reached over without ceremony and put his hand over hers. Not romantic, not performed. The way a person steadies something that matters. She turned her hand over and held on for a moment. Then she let go, straightened, and said, "I need to sleep. 4 hours minimum." "Room set," Pauline said. "Back of the house." Rosalie stood. She looked at Cole. "If Dales moves tonight." "He won't find you," Cole said. "I'll be on the door." "You haven't slept in—" "I'll sleep after the courthouse," he said. "Go." She went. She woke at 5:30 to Cole's voice through the door, not alarmed, just present. "Time to move." She was dressed in 3 minutes. She had the documents repacked in the oilskin in 2 more. When she came out, Cole had coffee made and handed her the cup without preamble, and she drank it standing up the same way she had that first morning outside Gruber's relay station, which already felt like it belonged to a different chapter of her life. Ruth's riders were at the door by 6:45. 7 people total, moving through early morning Casper in the quiet that preceded commerce, and nobody looking at them, because they were simply a livestock outfit and a few extra hands, and a woman in a practical dress carrying a bag. They were half a block from the courthouse when Dales stepped out of a doorway. He had 2 men with him. A third appeared from across the street. He looked at the group, at Cole, at Ruth, at her riders, and made the calculation that Rosalie had hoped he'd make, which was that the number of witnesses was inconvenient. He looked at Rosalie. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. His voice was pleasant. "I'd like to speak with you before you go inside." "I'm sure you would," she said, and kept walking. He stepped into her path. Cole moved, not dramatically, not with a speech. He simply stepped between Dales and Rosalie with the absolute certainty of someone who had already decided this exact thing was not going to happen. "You're blocking a public walkway," Cole said. Dales looked up at him. This is a private matter between the company and... She's walking to a federal courthouse, Cole said. The only private matter here is whether you'd like to explain to Judge Bellamy why you physically obstructed a witness. He held Dales's gaze with the flat, unhurried patience of a man who was not bluffing. You can do that from inside the courthouse or from out here. Your choice. Dales's jaw tightened. He looked past Cole to Rosalie. The document you're carrying was stolen, he said. Filing stolen property as evidence is a crime. Then file a complaint, Rosalie said from behind Cole's shoulder. The judge is right inside. Ruth Ellison moved up on Rosalie's left side. One of her riders moved up on the right. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. Dales looked at the group assembled on the walkway in the early morning sun and completed the same arithmetic Cole had completed on a mountain trail 4 days ago. The arithmetic of actual odds versus performed confidence, and came to the same conclusion. He stepped back. Rosalie walked past him into the courthouse. The side entrance, Pruitt, 8 o'clock. Pruitt was a thin young man with ink-stained fingers who looked at Rosalie with the particular alertness of someone who'd been briefed and was taking the briefing seriously. He led her through a hallway and into a small room that had a table and 2 chairs and a window, and felt official in the spare, functional way of rooms where actual decisions got made rather than performed. Bellamy arrived 4 minutes after she did, which meant he'd been there already. He sat down across from her, had Pruitt close the door and said, I sent a message to the county sheriff at 6 this morning. A federal message, not a local one. He held her gaze. Dennison has been suspended from his position pending review. The sheriff, the actual sheriff, not anyone on Crail's payroll, has been briefed on what I read last night. Rosalie set the documents on the table. Before we begin formally, Bellamy said, I want to tell you something. In 30 years on the circuit, I have seen perhaps a dozen cases that were built the way yours is built. He looked at the organized stack in front of him. Most evidence arrives damaged by whoever found it, because people who find evidence are afraid, and afraid people make poor archivists. He paused. This is not damaged. This is complete. She thought of Thomas going through those records for 4 months, noting every discrepancy in his careful hand. She thought of Cole at Pauline's table, finding the date that didn't fit, telling her to write the explanation in plain language. She thought of herself copying page after page in a freight office in Garnet Falls while her husband was dying and she didn't know it yet. My husband built it, she said. I carried it. Bellamy nodded once with the gravity of a man who understood the full weight of that sentence. Then let's make sure he gets credit for it, he said. He opened the documents. Pruitt positioned himself at the corner with paper and pen. Outside the window, Casper went about its morning, and somewhere on the walkway outside, she knew Cole Whitmore was standing with his arms folded, watching the street, the same way he watched the trail, not for what was happening, but for what was about to. The testimony began. She told the truth. All of it. Every number, every name, every date, every rerouted shipment, and falsified invoice, and bribed official, and delayed medicine. She spoke for 2 hours without stopping, and Pruitt wrote everything down, and Bellamy asked 7 questions in that entire time, each one precise and surgical, and pointing exactly at the place where the evidence needed one more pin to hold it. When she finished, Bellamy sat back and looked at the stack of documented truth on the table between them. Mrs. Mercer, he said, I'm issuing a preservation order on all Crail Freight Company records in this territory, effective immediately. I'm also issuing a summons for a Mr. Hargrove and a Mr. Dales to appear before this court. He paused. The County Land Claim Office will be operating under federal supervision until this matter is resolved. Any filings made in the last 14 months involving properties connected to the names in these documents will be reviewed. Her hands were very still on the table. Thomas's land. Her sister's savings. 11 people who hadn't received medicine. Henry and Clara 2 days behind her on the territorial road with a land grant and no way to know what they were walking into. Henry Marsh, she said, and his wife Clara. They're traveling north toward Casper with a land grant claim. Their property may be in the affected area. Bellamy looked at Pruitt. Note the name. We'll flag it when the filing review begins. She felt something in her chest unlock that had been locked since the moment she'd pressed her hands into the dirt outside Garnet Falls, and pushed herself upright for what she'd thought might be the last time. She did not cry. She had not cried since Thomas's grave, and she was not going to start in a federal courthouse. But she sat with the feeling for one full moment and let it be what it was. Then she picked up her bag, stood, and said, "Thank you, Judge Bellamy. Thank your husband," he said. "He built the case, and thank whoever helped you carry it." She walked out of the side entrance of the Casper Territorial Courthouse into the August morning, and Cole was there, not at the door, but 20 feet out on the walkway, positioned where he could see both the entrance and the street exactly where she would have put him if she'd been placing him herself. He looked at her face and read it the same way he read weather and terrain and the movement of riders on a ridge. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He didn't ask how it went. He could see how it went. He turned and fell into step beside her, and for half a block neither of them said anything, and the morning sun came at them from the east, and the town moved around them with the ordinary indifference of a place that didn't know what had just happened inside one of its rooms. Then Cole said quietly, "Thomas would be satisfied." She walked another 3 steps before she answered. "Yes," she said. "He would." And that was enough. That was in the arithmetic of grief and love, and 700 miles of hard country, exactly and precisely enough. The aftermath of truth is quieter than people expect. Rosalie had imagined, in the way a person imagines the end of a long march while still in the middle of it, that the moment after the courthouse would feel like something. Like a door opening or a weight lifting or the particular quality of air that follows a storm that has finally finished. Instead, it felt like stopping. Like the body's slow recognition that the thing it had been running toward was no longer ahead of it, and that the legs needed a moment to understand that running was no longer required. She and Cole walked back to Pauline's in the morning sun without speaking. Ruth Ellison was on the when they arrived, coffee in hand, and she read their faces with the same directness she applied to everything, and simply said, "Good," and went inside to find more cups. They spent 2 more days in Casper, while Bellamy's preservation order worked through the territory's legal machinery. Pruitt came to Pauline's on the first afternoon with a receipt for the evidence submission and a formal acknowledgement of Rosalie's testimony, both signed by Bellamy and stamped with the Federal Circuit seal. She held the receipt for a moment before folding it carefully into the oilskin that had carried the documents across 3 mountain ranges and 1 storm and 400 miles of hard country. Thomas's name was on it. Witness, Thomas Mercer, deceased, Garnet Falls, Wyoming Territory. Evidence compiled and submitted posthumously by Rosalie Mercer's spouse. She put it away before Cole could see her face. On the second day, Hargrove was taken into federal custody at the Crail Freight Office on the south end of Casper. Dales was detained at the hotel where he'd been staying and taken to the courthouse for questioning. Dennison, the county clerk, had not come to work that morning, and by afternoon, a federal rider had been sent to find him. Ruth came to tell her about Hargrove's detention, with the satisfied expression of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for a specific thing, and was allowing herself to appreciate it for exactly as long as it deserved. "Dennison ran," Ruth said. "They'll find him. Men like that always run towards someone they think will protect them, and those people tend to hand them over the moment it becomes inconvenient." "The land claims," Rosalie said. "The review. Bellamy's clerk has a list of 47 properties flagged for review," Ruth said, "including Henry and Clara Marsh. I sent a rider south to meet them on the road with a letter from Pruitt." She paused. "Also including Thomas's claim." Rosalie went very still. "Thomas's land," Ruth said carefully, "is in the review. The fraudulent option Crail held on it has been suspended pending the outcome of the fraud case. Which means it's still your land, Rosalie. Until and unless a court says otherwise, and given what Bellamy has in that evidence room, no court is going to say otherwise. The land. Thomas's land outside Garnet Falls, with its 2 freight line junctions and its 4 times value, and the marker she'd put in straight, because she'd had to do it alone, and she'd been determined that one thing would be right, even if nothing else was. She sat down at Pauline's kitchen table. Cole was in the doorway. He'd heard. I didn't say anything. He simply came inside and sat across from her and let the silence be what it needed to be. which was the sound of a woman absorbing the fact that the thing her husband died protecting was going to survive him. After a while, she said, "I need to go back." Cole said, "I know. Not just to the land," she said. "I need to go back to Garnet Falls, to the grave." She looked at her hands. "I left too fast. I buried him, and I started running, and I didn't—" She stopped. "I didn't finish." Cole was quiet for a moment. "How long is the return journey?" 3 days on the main road. 4 if the weather turns." "The weather won't turn," he said. "It's been clear since the storm." She looked at him. "You're coming." It wasn't a question. He heard that it wasn't. "You're 7.5 months along," he said. "And the main road runs through Crail territory for the first 30 miles until the federal order reaches those stations." He held her gaze. "Yes, I'm coming." She nodded once. "Then we leave tomorrow." The road back was different from the road in. The same miles approximately, but traveled differently, not because the terrain had changed, but because they had. They rode with the Ellison outfit as far as the Southern Fork, where Ruth shook Rosalie's hand with both of hers, and told her to send word when the baby arrived, and said it in the manner of a woman who intended to receive that word and act on it, after the fork. It was just Cole and Rosalie and the horse, and the open territorial road, and 3 days of the particular kind of travel that happens when two people have already moved through danger together and come out the other side and have no more performance left in them. Nothing to prove, no calculation, to make just the road and the miles, and the occasional conversation that surfaced and sank again like something natural. On the first day, she told him about her father's last years. How he'd stayed in Missouri after her mother died and kept practicing medicine out of the front room of the house until his hands shook too badly to be trusted, and how she'd sat with him through those last months and learned that the thing a person fears most is not death, but irrelevance. Being done before the work is done. Cole listened and then said after a while, "He raised someone who carries evidence through the bighorns at 7 months pregnant. I don't think he needs to worry about irrelevance." She looked at him. "That's the kindest thing you've said to me." "I've said other kind things." "You've said practical things that happen to be kind," she said. "That one was just kind." He looked at the road ahead. "Don't make a habit of pointing it out or I'll stop." She laughed. It surprised her the ease of it, the way it came out without requiring permission. She hadn't laughed like that since before Thomas got sick, and the sound of it felt strange, and then felt necessary, and then felt like something she was going to need to do more of. Cole glanced at her sideways, and something in his face was open in a way she hadn't seen before. Something that didn't have a name precisely, but that she recognized by its effect, the way it made her chest feel wider, like a window opened in a room that had been closed too long. She faced forward and let that be what it was. The second day brought the first real test. They were 20 miles south of Casper, moving through a section of road that ran between 2 Crail freight stations when they came around a bend and found 3 riders blocking the road. Not Dales. Not Hargrove. These were men she didn't recognize, company jackets, no badges. The kind of men who did the work that the men with pleasant expressions didn't want to do themselves. The one in front looked at Cole, looked at Rosalie, and looked at the horse. "Rosalie Mercer," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're to come with us." Cole stopped the horse with one hand on the reins and said nothing. His other hand rested on his thigh 3 inches from the revolver. "On whose authority?" she said. "Crail Freight Company has a—" "The Crail Freight Company," she said, "is under a federal preservation order issued by Judge Amos Bellamy of the Federal Circuit Court. Its officers are in federal custody. Its land options have been suspended. Whatever authority you believe you have, I'd recommend you think carefully about who issued it and whether they'll be in a position to protect you from the consequences of acting on it." She kept her voice completely level. "I've just spent 4 days in front of a federal judge. I know what he looks like when he's annoyed. I'd suggest you avoid giving him a reason to learn your names." The man in front looked at his companions. Something passed between them, the specific calculation of men who'd signed on for routine intimidation and were now being asked to do something considerably less routine. Cole said quietly, and without inflection, "Roads public." The 3 men looked at him. He looked back. The revolver was still 3 inches from his hand. His posture communicated with complete economy that the 3 inches was not a problem. The man in front turned his horse. They rode north without another word. Rosalie let out a slow breath. "That was the last," Cole said. It was not quite a question. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But they'll find out what happened to Hargrove and Dales by tonight, and after that whoever's left will be looking for the exit rather than the fight." She paused. "Crail's lawyers will be very busy for the next several years. They won't be spending resources on us." "On you," Cole said. She looked at him. "You're the witness," he said. "They'll leave me alone. They'll leave me alone because I'm a mountain man with water rights they no longer have any hope of acquiring." Something moved in his voice that wasn't quite humor and wasn't quite bitterness, but lived in the territory between them. "They'll spend their lawyers on you." "Then I'll need a good lawyer," she said. "Ruth Ellison knows people," he said. "Of course she does," Rosalie said. They kept riding south. Garnet Falls appeared on the third afternoon smaller than she remembered, or maybe it was just that she was different, and the town hadn't changed, and the difference registered as a change in scale. The same main street, the same dry goods, and the same livery, and the same faces that had watched her come through 6 weeks ago, with a dead husband's papers and a pregnant woman's particular invisibility. She had the oilskin in her bag. She had Bellamy's receipt. She had 3 days of open road behind her and the mountains behind that, and before all of it, the moment outside Garnet Falls, where she'd pressed her hands into the dirt and refused to stay down. The grave was half a mile east of town on the property Thomas had claimed. She'd been afraid on the road, in the quiet moments when she let herself think about it, that returning would undo something. That the thin, disciplined composure she'd maintained across 400 miles of hard country and a federal courthouse and 3 armed riders would fail her here at a wooden marker she'd put in straight, because it was the one thing she could control. Cole stopped the horse outside the property line without being asked. She looked at him. "You go," he said. "I'll wait." "You don't have to." "I know I don't," he said. "Go." She climbed down and walked across Thomas's land toward the marker. The ground was dry under her feet. She had buried him in June, and it was August now, and the summer had been long. The marker was exactly as she'd left it. Straight. The letters she'd carved were still clear. She stood in front of it for a long time without speaking. Then she put her hand in her bag and took out the folded oilskin and held it against her chest. "It's done," she said. "The documents are filed. Bellamy has the evidence. Dales and Hargrove are in custody, and the fraudulent option on this land has been suspended." She pressed her hand flat against the oilskin. "I know you know that, but I wanted to say it to your face, or as close as I can get." The wind moved through the grass. "The baby's well," she said. "She's been busy. She kicked through the entire storm in the Bighorns, which is something you would have appreciated." She paused. "There's a man. He helped me carry it. Not because he was asked to, and not because he didn't know what it would cost him. He couldn't walk past." She looked at the marker. "You would have liked him. He doesn't waste words, and he builds things to last, and he already had a second cup before I arrived." Her voice was steady. "I'm not replacing anything. I'm not trying to. I wanted you to know." The grass moved. Nothing answered. Nothing needed to. She stood there for a few more minutes in the August afternoon, in the particular silence of a woman who has finished what she came to do and is learning what comes next. Then she turned and walked back to where Cole was waiting. He looked at her face and, as always, read it accurately. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said, and meant it in the full sense of the word, which included everything that had happened, and everything that had been lost, and everything that was against all reasonable expectation still possible. She took the horse's reins, and they walked back toward town. They stayed 2 nights in Garnet Falls, while Rosalie arranged for the property's basic maintenance with a neighbor who owed Thomas a debt and was glad to have a way to pay it. She visited the county clerk and confirmed in writing that the Bellamy preservation order applied to Thomas's claim. She wrote a letter to her sister in the north detailing what had happened, what was filed, and what the sister could expect regarding their late father's estate matters that had become entangled in the same fraud web. On the second evening, she and Cole sat on Thomas's porch. Her porch. She was learning to say it and watch the light go out of the sky the way Thomas had always watched it without needing to comment. After a while, Cole said, "What do you do now?" She had been thinking about this for a long time. Not in the anxious, urgent way of someone planning an escape, but in the quiet, deliberate way of someone building something real. "There's no freight inspection operation on the northern mountain routes," she said. "Independent operators have no way to verify shipments before they're committed to them. No standardized records, no accountability." She looked at the fading sky. That's how Crail did it. Isolation and opacity. No one could see the full picture because no one was positioned to. Cole was very still. "Someone with access to the northern routes," she said carefully, "and the ability to maintain records and verify manifests could change that. Not overnight, but steadily." "Someone," he said. "A freight inspection station," she said. "Small, voluntary at first. Operators who want their records verified come to it. Settlements that want to confirm their shipments before paying for them use it. It doesn't compete with freight companies. It just makes the information visible." Cole looked at her. "Where?" She looked back at him. "There's one reliable water source on the northern mountain routes. One place where every freight outfit and cattle operation and settler wagon stops in summer." He was quiet for a long moment. "You're describing my land," he said. "I'm describing the most strategically located piece of private property in this section of the territory," she said. "And I'm describing something that would make what happened last winter, the 11 people, the medicine, the rerouted shipments, considerably harder to repeat." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to live on your land, Cole. I'm asking whether you'd consider a partnership, a business arrangement. I manage the records and the inspection operation. You maintain the routes and the water access. Equal authority. My name on the business alongside yours." The silence stretched out long enough to have weight. "You'd leave this," he said. He meant the land, the house, the porch where Thomas had watched the light fail. "I'd come back to this," she said. "It's mine. It'll be here." She paused. "But what I need to do next isn't here. It's in those mountains." She looked at him directly. "It's wherever someone can see the full picture." Cole looked at the horizon for a long time. Then he said, "I have one chair by the fire." "I know," she said. "I'll bring my own." "The kitchen is insufficient for 2 people cooking." "You don't cook," she said. "You heat things and call it cooking. That's different." Something moved in his face that was real and deep, and not at all hidden. "My cabin is half a day's hard ride from the nearest town," he said. "I've been half a day's hard ride from civilization for the better part of a month," she said. "I've managed." "You're about to have the baby," he said, and his voice for the first time since she'd known him had something in it that wasn't controlled. Something that was simply there, open and unguarded. The sound of a man who had been alone for 8 years and had found, without fully deciding, to that he no longer wanted to be. "Babies have been born in mountain cabins before," she said. "Not mine," he said. And then seemed to realize what he'd said and looked at the ground. Rosalie looked at him. At the set of his jaw and the line of his shoulders and the hands that had carried her supply crate up a switchback in the dark and put themselves between her and 4 armed riders and held the rope while she pulled an injured man clear of a wagon axle. "Cole," she said. He looked up. "I'm not asking you to rescue me," she said. "I'm not asking you to carry me or protect me or be responsible for me. I have done this alone for 6 weeks, and I can do it alone for 6 more years if that's what's required." She kept her voice steady. "I'm asking whether you want a partner, a real one. Because the work I'm describing is better with 2, and so is the life around it, and I think you know that, and I think you've known it since you acquired a second cup before I arrived." I was very still. "The cup was," he started. "Cole," she said. He stopped. "Yes or no," she said. The light was almost gone now, the last of it sitting on the western horizon, in a line of pale gold. And somewhere a horse shifted in the stable and the grass moved in the evening wind, and the world was exactly as indifferent as it had always been, and exactly as beautiful as it was possible for a thing to be when you had survived long enough to look at it properly. Cole said, yes, one word, without qualification, without the hedge or the condition or the careful distance of a man protecting himself from what he wanted. Just yes. Rosalie nodded once. Then we'll need to add a second stove, she said, because you burn coffee. He made the sound that was a laugh, the full version this time, not the almost version, the real one, and it was a good sound, solid and genuine, and nothing like a performance. I don't burn coffee, he said. Every single morning, she said. That's how mountain coffee is supposed to taste. That is not a defensible position, and you know it. He shook his head, still somewhere between laughing and not. And she looked at him in the last of the evening light, and thought that Thomas had been right. The best things were quiet. The best things showed up when you weren't looking, and asked nothing you couldn't give, and offered nothing that was false. They left for the mountains 3 days later. Rosalie's wagon, a new one purchased with money from the Garnet Falls Bank, where Thomas had kept a small account, carried her things, and the crate that now held not evidence, but the beginning of what would become the Whitmore-Mercer Freight Inspection Ledger. Cole's horse walked beside it, and the territory opened north, and the bighorns rose ahead of them, clean and enormous, and entirely unchanged by everything that had happened beneath them, at the property line. She stopped the wagon and looked back at Thomas's land for a long moment. Then she faced forward and said, "Let's go." Cole clicked his tongue to the horse, and they moved. The baby arrived 6 weeks later, in the first week of October, in Cole's cabin on the creek flat, with the mountains outside, and the water running cold over the rocks, and a fire going in the hearth that did not burn the coffee, because Rosalie had taken over the coffee duties, and Cole had not argued, which she had noted in the nascent ledger of things he was capable of learning. Ruth Ellison had sent a woman from Douglas who had delivered 43 babies in 20 years and approached the whole matter with the same practical, unhurried competence that Rosalie had come to understand was the highest form of human skill. Cole stayed outside on the porch for 4 hours and wore a path in the boards that was visible for years afterward. When the woman opened the door and said it was done, he was inside in 3 steps. The baby was small and loud, and had an opinion about everything immediately, which Rosalie said was a Mercer family trait, and Cole said he was beginning to suspect was also available in the general population. She was a girl. Rosalie had known. Cole held her with the careful, whole-body attention of a man who understood fragile things, and never let that understanding make him hesitant. He held her, and looked at her face, and said nothing for a long time, and Rosalie watched him, and understood that something was being completed in him that had been left unfinished for 8 years, and that completion was not about her. Not entirely. It was about a man who had believed he had no right to care for something breakable, finding out that he was wrong. "She needs a name," Cole said. "I know," Rosalie said. They had talked about names. She had told him Thomas's choices. She had told him her own. She had thought about her father and her sister and the women in Thomas's family and all the ordinary names that carried ordinary weight. But looking at Cole holding her daughter in a mountain cabin in October with the fire going and the creek running outside, she knew. "Elias," she said. "If we make it a woman's name, Ellie." Cole looked at her. His jaw worked once. "Ellie Mercer Whitmore," Rosalie said. "For the man who got 2 children to high ground, who saved the lives your brother saved at the cost of his own." Cole was quiet for a long time. "That's not," he started. "It is," she said. "It is exactly." He looked back down at the baby. At Ellie, who was examining the ceiling with the focused intensity of someone who had just arrived and was not about to miss anything. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady because he made it steady, and she loved him for the effort and for the honesty underneath it. "He would have liked you," Cole said, not to Rosalie, to Ellie. Then he looked at Rosalie and said, "He would have liked you too." She reached out and put her hand over his, both their hands around the baby, their daughter Ellie, who was already making clear that she had places to be and no patience for sentiment, and said, "Tell me about him." And Cole Whitmore, who had spent 8 years building walls against the weight of other people's lives, opened his mouth and told his daughter about her uncle. The Whitmore-Mercer Mountain Station opened in the spring of the following year. It began small as single inspection desk, a public ledger nailed to the wall beside the door, so any driver could read the actual price of any shipment without asking permission, and a medical room with Rosalie's supplies that was open to anyone who came off the mountain trail needing it. By summer 17, independent freight operations had registered their routes with the station. By fall, the Territorial Land Office had established an official correspondence with the station as an inspection point for shipment verification. Crail Freight Company's trial concluded the following spring. Hargrove received 7 years. Dales received 5. Dennison, who had been found in Cheyenne attempting to board a railroad east, received 3. The company's assets were liquidated and distributed to the settlements whose medicine and grain had been withheld. Ruth Ellison's cattle brand was confirmed without error. Henry and Clara Marsh's homestead claim was validated and recorded without amendment. Thomas Mercer's land outside Garnet Falls was confirmed as the property of his estate, managed by his widow, clear of all Crail encumbrances, and generating a small quarterly income from the freight junction lease that Rosalie had negotiated herself before leaving Garnet Falls. The day the final verdict arrived by post, Rosalie read the letter standing at the station desk with Ellie on one hip and a shipping manifest in her other hand. Cole came in from the stable and read her face. "Hargrove," she said. 7 years. He nodded once. "Is it enough?" he said. She thought about 11 people. She thought about Thomas's hands on the ledger pages, careful and deliberate, knowing what he was doing and doing it anyway. She thought about a marker she'd put in straight because she'd needed one thing to be right. "No," she said honestly. "It's not enough. It never will be." She looked at him. "But it's what we have, and what we have is more than we had, and we built it from nothing, and that is going to have to be sufficient." Cole looked at her steadily. "It is," he said. She looked down at the manifest in her hand, then at Ellie, who had seized a fistful of her collar and was considering it thoughtfully. Then at the door of the station, which stood open as it always did to whoever came off the trail needing something. A wagon appeared on the road, moving slow, a family from the look of it. A man and a woman and children, the specific tired but determined posture of people who had been traveling a long time and were not yet at the end of it, but were beginning to believe the end existed. Rosalie handed Cole the manifest and shifted Ellie to her other hip and walked to the door. The wagon pulled up. The man on the bench looked at the station, looked at the sign, and looked at Rosalie in the doorway with the particular expression of someone who had been told to expect help and was not yet sure whether to believe it. "This the Whitmore-Mercer station," he said. "Yes," she said. "Come inside. There's water at the trough for your animals, and I can check your manifest against the current freight prices if you need it." The man glanced at his wife. She was already climbing down. "We were told," he started. "You were told right," Rosalie said. "Whatever you need, we'll see what we can do." She stepped back and held the door open, and the family came in out of the August heat, into the cool interior of a place built for exactly this. For the people the powerful had decided. Didn't matter who had traveled long distances on insufficient resources, who arrived tired and uncertain and in need of the thing that cost least to give and meant the most to receive. Cole was at the desk. He pulled out the public ledger and turned it so the man could read it. "Your shipment number," Cole said. "We'll run it against the territorial record." The man gave it. Cole found the entry without hurrying and pointed to the column. "You've been overcharged," Cole said. 17% above the recorded rate. The man stared at the number, then at Cole, then at the ledger. "Can you?" he started. "We can document it," Rosalie said, "and we can file it with the Territorial Inspector's Office on your behalf. It won't recover the money today, but it builds the record, and the record matters." She looked at him steadily. "Names matter. Write yours in the station log when you leave. Every name makes the next name harder to ignore." The man wrote his name. His wife wrote hers beside it. Their children were given water, and the oldest was given a piece of the hard cheese Rosalie kept for travelers, and sat at the corner of the desk, eating it with the solemn concentration of a child, taking something seriously. Cole looked at Rosalie over the man's head. She looked back. What passed between them was not a grand declaration. It was smaller than that, and larger than that, and it was the thing that endures when everything performed has been worn away by actual living. The plain recognition between two people who have chosen the same difficult thing and are still deliberately every day choosing it. Outside the mountains held their ground the way they always had. Inside the ledger was open. The names were being written, and the work, the real work, the kind that outlasts any one person and requires more than one pair of hands, had only just begun. This is what strength looks like when it chooses to stay. Not the strength of the man who defeats 20 riders. Not the strength of the woman who carries evidence through a storm. But the strength of two people who look at a broken world and decide every morning without ceremony, without applause, that they are going to build something honest inside it. And they did. And it was enough. And it was more than enough. And it was everything.